Hey everyone, thank you. It's so nice to be here with you today. I'm actually just really excited to be in a room with this many people again. So thank you so much for inviting me. And I'm excited to talk to you today about this next wave in clean energy and how we can have it benefit our communities and really benefit all of us. But before I do that, I thought I would tell you a little bit about ULI, in case you're not familiar. Urban Land Institute is an education and research institute. We're a global membership organization. We have about 45,000 members around the world, 2,100 here in the Bay Area, and 2,100 here in the Bay Area. And our membership comes from the development side, finance, professional services, and the public sector. What we do is we bring people together to really to educate them. Our members create all of our educational resources that we share with the greater industry and with our other members. And we create professional development opportunities for them and training. And then we also provide technical advisory services to cities. So we bring together experts from multidisciplinary experts to provide impartial advice to help cities solve really challenging real estate, land use, and urban development issues that they have. So what I want to talk to you about today, and I'm excited to talk to you about, is really at the intersection of real estate, clean energy, and social equity. We're at the beginning of a clean energy revolution. And if we shape it correctly, we can really make that trajectory so that it helps really improve our communities and our businesses, and that we can all really take part in this new economy. So why is this clean energy economy so important? Well, I don't think I have to tell anyone in this audience that we're having a climate emergency. If you lived here in the Bay Area last September and experienced Orange Sky Day, the day where there were so many wildfires raging across the whole region, that day and night merged and the sky was completely orange. And so you know that climate change is real right now, and you also know that none of us are insulated from it. And at the same time that we're having this climate emergency, we of course have a global health crisis with a pandemic. We have economic uncertainty. We have massive social inequality. And here in the Bay Area, we have a very acute housing crisis, this housing shortage that has really created such an affordability crisis for so many people. But in the middle of all of this, there are some bright spots. And one of these bright spots has really been, in recent years, clean energy. And here in California, we do a really great job, actually, at clean energy. So back in 2018, you may know that Governor Brown signed an executive order saying that our electricity grid needs to be powered by 100% clean energy by 2045. So we're on our way, we're well on our way to doing this. So particularly on spring mornings, those sunny spring mornings, we're producing so much green power that we are giving it away to other states for free. We have far more than we could use. And at one point during our grid this spring, we had 95% of our grids was powered by clean energy. So it's a remarkable accomplishment. So we can actually get to this 100% clean grid by 2045. And Governor Newsom is looking at bringing that date forward. But one challenge that we have is called the duck curve. And you guys might be familiar with this, but in case you're not, this shows the demand on California's grid for power. So during the day, we have so much rooftop solar that there isn't as much demand on the grid. So that's when it goes down. And somebody thought that this looked like the back of a duck. So that's why it's called the duck curve. But then at 5 or 6 o'clock, of course, the sun goes down and we have to fire up all these dirty fossil fuel plants. And these peaker plants that address peak load are terrible for the environment, but they're really terrible for the people who live near them. They're very frequently located in communities of color, low-income communities, kind of like the peaker plant we have in West Oakland that operates on jet fuel. So this is really also a major public health issue as well. But we can solve this problem. To solve this problem, what we need is storage. And by storage, I mean battery storage. And of course, we need utility scale storage. That's critical. And most new solar plants are now being put with battery power. They're coming in as a complete package. But another thing we need are distributed energy resources, or DERs. And today, when I talk about that, I mean specifically solar panels, batteries, and cars, because what are cars but batteries with wheels? Electric cars, that is. And I think we all know that they reduce carbon emissions, but they can also increase community resilience. So when we think about things like Hurricane Ida that just swept through the Southeast and the Northeast corridor, and people were left with without power for days and sometimes weeks, those people with solar panels and batteries did have power and could become community hubs for other people to do things like charge their phones. So there's also what we experience here all the time, which are those power safety shutoffs, when we'll shut off parts of the grid during when there's really high potential for wildfires, and people can be without power. And so, but if we have more of these resources, again, we have more resilience during these increasingly frequent weather events that are really fueled by climate change. But another interesting thing is that DERs, or distributed energy resources, can help stabilize the grid. So 2 studies have come out this year, one out of Princeton, that shows that by increasing the amount of DERs we have on the grid, we can actually, it makes the grid more flexible and more stable, and we can actually increase the amount of utility scale renewables that we put onto the grid. So we need these for a lot of infrastructure reasons. But what I'd like to talk about today is how they can benefit us in our communities. So I'd like to talk about how we might be able to use these distributed resources to help finance development that we need, like more low and middle income housing, how it can support our community goals, and we can take the money that will be generated by this change in our power systems and invest it in our communities, and how we can use them to increase social equity. And I thought the best way to kind of illustrate this point is to talk about a day in the life of, in this future world that we want to get to. And I'm really going to start by talking about a single family home owner, but I'm definitely going to also talk about how this relates to multifamily and also renters. So let's imagine it's a day in the life of our homeowner here, and she wakes up in a home that's 100% all electric, completely powered by renewable power. She has solar panels and batteries, and of course, an electric vehicle. But because all of these things and her energy use is really managed by automated software, she's blissfully unaware of it. In fact, she doesn't even remember really what it's like to have an energy bill. So then she goes down to breakfast and makes her breakfast on her induction stovetop, which of course is so much faster than her gas stove. And she's really aware of how much cleaner her air is now that she's not burning methane in her kitchen every day. But as much as she loves her induction stove, she really loves her electric car, right? It's so quiet, and it kind of feels like driving an iPad, right? So she loves it, and she loves that she pays almost nothing to operate it. So she drives to work, and she happens to work in an industrial warehouse, which of course, because of all of its rooftop, has plenty of solar power and batteries, and also truck charging stations. So these truck charging stations are not only better for everyone who works at the facility because the air quality is so much better, and for everyone who lives near the facility, but the truck drivers love it too because they don't come home smelling like diesel. Now, the owners of this industrial facility like these charging stations because they're now providing an extra service to their customers, and because they can charge trucks for using their power sources, just the same way that gas stations used to charge them for supplying them with gas. But this isn't the only way that the industrial building owner makes money. They're producing so much power that they are able to trade and sell their extra power to other building owners using blockchain platforms. So let's say we have multifamily or office owners that just don't have enough rooftop space to be able to provide all the energy they need to get to net zero. They know their investors are demanding they get to net zero. So how do they do that? Well, one way they can do that is through power purchase agreements, but they can now execute these agreements with other building owners. So this has created new revenue sources and new relationships from all these different types of building types, of course, depending on when they're used. So at this point, pretty much all of our buildings we see now are going to have renewable power on their roof. They're going to have batteries. They're going to be all electric. Think about retail centers that are really struggling right now. Well, they've got all that roof space. And as they reposition their assets and include more things like housing that we need in their very large parking lots, they also have plenty of room for things like batteries and renewable power. And factories are also going all electric and using renewable power because of the incredible demand for low embodied carbon products that now those same portfolio owners are demanding for their buildings, right? So now we have a situation where we've got climate improvement, it's healthier air inside and outside of buildings, it's better for business, and millions of jobs have been created over the entire country. It is estimated that 11 million jobs could be created in the coming decade as we move towards this new clean energy economy. So this is all great, but what does this mean for our communities? How does this help individuals? And how can we make sure this money, all of this money wealth that's gonna be generated, how can it stay in our communities? So let's go back to our homeowner and her neighbors. So because they all have these same kind of distributed resources in their homes, they've now signed up for virtual power plants. And that's where virtual power plants can aggregate these distributed resources, particularly battery power, and then take it and sell it, buy, sell it, and trade it. Now, they could, of course, go through their utility and they could get a credit on their bill, but it's kind of boring, right? So, but they could actually sign up for a virtual power plant that's really through an app on their phone. So they can manage their power, see how much money they're making, and their app will let them also, it's like an e-wallet, right? They can take the money that they're making from their battery and just go buy things with it. They can also make charitable contributions. And so her neighbors were convinced by the school during their annual fall fundraising campaign that they should donate their extra electricity this month to the school. You can imagine what public radio is going to do when they find out about this, right? So the school itself is also, of course, covered in the panels and has the batteries. But not only that, they also now have electric school buses. So school buses are only used 200 days of the year, about 6 hours a day. And they used to have these gas-powered vehicles that just cost them money to operate. But now they have an asset that makes them money when they're not using it. So you can see how maybe a city or other institution might be able to use these once only cost center assets and turn them into revenue sources. But again, how does this help individuals and how does this help renter? I mean, 50% of the Bay Area is renters. I'm a renter. I'd love to be able to plug in my electric car right where I live instead of at the neighborhood charging station. I want an induction stove, especially now that I've read the different studies showing how kids who grew up in homes with gas appliances are 40% more likely to have asthma. Or the study that came out of Melbourne, Australia last year that showed that having gas appliances in your home was like living with a smoker. So like, I want into the clean energy economy, but how can we do this? And how can we finance more of the housing we need? Well, in this world that we're talking about here, that will hopefully exist sooner rather than later, cities are a very instrumental part of this. So they have a real incentive to want to meet their clean energy targets, but also to have more community resilience. Again, power safety shutoffs, extreme weather events. And so what cities can do is provide incentives to developers and existing building owners to put these kinds of resources into their buildings. So for example, they could offer density bonuses, which costs the city nothing, but that can make a difference between a project going forward or not. Just to give a little context, it's really hard to build housing in the Bay Area. You probably know that, but in particular, low income and middle income housing. It's so expensive to build right now that these projects just don't pencil. So what developers do is take all these small things that come together to help make a project possible. So something like a density bonus or other financial incentive, like maybe even just reduce the amount of parking they have to provide, can all be cobbled together to make a project pencil. So cities can do that. Many cities are also party to utility retailers. So they might have their own municipal utility. They might be a party to or have their own community choice aggregators. We have a lot of those here in the Bay Area, and they are stakeholders in those, and they can work with the utility retailer to make favorable arrangements to building owners and developers. If there was a guaranteed revenue stream, a purchase agreement that would from the revenue and the energy that could be on site, that can help improve a developer's capitalization rate, their access to money, and can make a big difference between a project going forward or not. Another thing in this world that could happen is that as more and more investors demand that developers go to net zero, and some of them just might not be able to generate all the energy they need to on site. And so they can buy verifiable offsets. And so that's what we're hearing now. We're hearing about big developers who, international companies, publicly held, they're actually investing in utility scale solar to help them, and they're buying those offsets. And it's an offset if that project would not otherwise exist without your investment. But most of the developers and building owners in the Bay Area, they're not the big international companies. They're locally based, and many of them are privately held, but they still have investors, and they still are going to need to get to net zero. The pressure is really on them. But what if, instead of investing in utility scale solar, they invested in enabling distributed energy resources to be on existing buildings, and that would allow other buildings that would never otherwise have the capital to make this happen in their buildings get to net zero? This would enable people of every income level to be able to participate in the clean energy economy. There are also ways that this can support more lower income people having access to some of these benefits. So for example, if you're an affordable housing developer and you've got this money coming in, and maybe this affects your capitalization rate, but if you knew that it was stable, it could help you keep your rents lower. If you've got other revenue coming in, you can achieve those other kinds of objectives. There's 600 units, multifamily. It's a partnership between the developer called Wasatch, Sonnen, the battery maker, and Rocky Mountain Power, which is the utility. And they wanted to create this virtual power plant, essentially. So there's a battery, that's the large white thing there, the size of a refrigerator, inside each unit. And everyone who lives there knows that the utility has access to that battery when they need it to help balance the grid, except in the winter, when they can only use it when it's a grid emergency. I mean, it's cold in Salt Lake City, right? So they have access to it, and they have about 150 car charging stations at this building, at this project. This project has been such a success that the utility is now partnering with a rooftop solar company that already has installed lots of solar in Utah to get the people who already have solar to install batteries. Their goal is to have 50,000 batteries in this next wave. And to give you a sense of scale, there are about 50,000 Tesla Powerwalls in California. And if we aggregated all of them, they would be the second largest battery in the state, second only to the Moss Landing battery just down the coast. So this is obviously a big success for the utility. They see this as a real model for them going forward. For the developer, it's working so well that they're coming to California. Now, they're not going to build new building because that can take a long time here, but they are buying existing buildings, and they have their first project is in Fresno, and they're retrofitting these buildings to have batteries. And their goal is to not raise the rents on these units. So they're not going to come in and retrofit them and jack up the rents. They're trying to keep the rent stable, but they're going to put batteries in them. And again, it's their anticipation that they can make enough money from doing this that it's profitable. And what's exciting to me about this is if we're going to get to a clean energy economy as fast as we possibly can, it has to work for everyone. It has to work for the utility. It needs to work for developers. It needs to work for people. But if it's working for everyone, we can see it scale. So again, I think we're going to see a lot of these virtual power plants. Last year, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission passed a ruling 2222, that said that actually aggregated virtual power plants, these aggregated batteries, should be able to trade on the wholesale markets. So that's going to be a complete game changer. All of the regional power grids, California has its own, but many of them cover multiple states, have to come up with rules for how they're going to do that. And California has said they're going to come up with those rules by next November, so November 2022. So inevitably, we're going to see more of these. And I really want to give credit to our local community choice aggregators that I mentioned earlier, because they have a pilot project going on right now. They're working with Sunrun, and they're going to install batteries at a discounted rate across multifamily and single family homes, including 20% affordable, which is crucial, to start creating this kind of virtual power plant. So I want to really give them credit for having that foresight and to really making affordability and equity a key piece of that initiative. I would like to give you an interesting example of another project that is buying kind of virtual power. And this is a real commercial from Australia.
Your solar panels generate energy to power most things. But when it comes to the energy that's left over, there's often only one thing you can do. Sell it to the grid for a fixed price. The VB Solar Exchange changes this by giving you the option to exchange your solar energy with us for beer. That's right. For the first time ever, you can now send your excess solar energy to VB. And for every $30 of energy you give us, we'll give you a slab of beer. All you have to do is sign up to the VB Solar Exchange with Diamond Energy, and we'll take care of the rest. So come on, Australia. Let's start exchanging your solar energy for big, cold beers.
So given the popularity of beer in Australia, I think you can say this is a case of the utility really understanding their customer base, right? But what's exciting about that also, it's one of those examples of a project that is, the transactions are being done through blockchain. So we're going to kind of see more of this. And it's interesting, the creation of these kind of branded experiences around your solar energy. Now, Australia has the highest rooftop solar penetration in the world, about 40% of their rooftops. But they're not the only place which is having, or only country which is looking at these kind of branded energy experiences. For the last few years, Mitsubishi has been offering in Japan what they call Dendo Drive houses, where they'll sell you a complete package, a house, a car, a battery, and solar panels. Now, it's not necessarily meant so much about interacting with the grid, but it's the idea that you might buy this complete thing and that all of these things will be talking to each other all the time. So it'll be interesting to see if this model moves to other places. I think another exciting brand development that happened this year is, of course, the launch of the electric Ford 150. The most popular truck in America now has an electric option. And it's actually so popular that you guys might have heard that a few weeks ago, Ford announced they're going to actually build their largest plant ever. It's going to be in Tennessee, and it's going to employ thousands of people just to meet the demand for these trucks. And what was really interesting to me about how these were being marketed when they were first launched was the idea that you can use them to power your home. So really tapping into that, American rugged individualist, I don't need anybody, I don't even need the grids, make it on my own kind of thing. And so, but when you see, the most popular truck in America going electric, you really understand that this electric car thing is, it's coming and it's coming quickly. Further proof to that is that Indiana already has a pilot project, and Michigan has just greenlighted a pilot project about a week ago to test roadways that will charge your car wirelessly as you drive over them. The Indiana project is being done with Purdue, and they're using magnetized concretes to be able to do this. So I think it's cool. I'm also a little bit afraid of that, but we're going to see what happens. But I have heard energy experts, electric vehicle experts say that there are some cases, they're envisioning some scenarios where it could be that electric vehicles are of such penetration that they do replace some of the poles and wires that we see on the street to deliver electricity to us. So what else is happening in this arena? Well, because we're in California, I think you guys may be aware that there's been a whole lot of ordinances adopted to really say that all buildings need to go all electric. 50 jurisdictions in California have adopted these ordinances. Starting here in Berkeley, they kicked it off a couple years ago. But it's not just in California, also Denver and Seattle have adopted these. And so that's going to be happening in the next few years. And a lot of these cities are actually looking right now at making these ordinances for existing buildings as well. ULI, the Urban Land Institute where I work, we issued a report back in June on Electrify about this movement towards all electric buildings and why you would want to do it and what you would need to do to really, again, begin educating the industry. We're also working on, I mentioned that we do technical advisory services. So we're going to be advising a city in early next year on exactly how they can provide incentives to developers and existing building owners to provide more affordable and middle income housing by including these distributed energy resources in their buildings. Now, from the time we proposed this to the time it actually happened, the state actually adopted some laws that buildings essentially most building types are going to have these DERs. But what we don't want them to do is kill housing because it's already so hard for it to pencil. So how can we make sure that that keeps happening? So to wrap up, we've got a lot to do. We, of course, need to decarbonize our entire electrical grid, and we need to accelerate renewable energy at every level. We've got to electrify everything because this renewable energy, we need our buildings to be able to use it. But what's important is that we need to take these solutions and translate them into benefits that resonate with people. Kind of like the Ford electric truck. You know, they marketed this truck right after we just came out of all the events that happened in Texas this winter, which, if you remember, was this massive cold storm that like shut down power across the state for days, where people actually froze to death. And there were lots of pictures of frozen wind turbines, but it was really the gas plants, most of them, that stopped working because it was so cold. So we have a lot to do, but we need to make sure these benefits aren't just we don't talk about them at the macro level, the big picture economic level, but how does it benefit people and what can they do? And then it is essential that we ensure that that this transition is equitable. Our climate solutions won't work if we don't put social equity at the heart of them. And I hope that I've given you a kind of vision today for a new kind of energy system, one that's decarbonized, decentralized, one that's more democratic, and that we can get to this world. I mean, it's not going to be easy, but if you just look back at what we've been through for the last 20, 21 months, things can change really quickly when we make choices to do things differently. And it's been a series of choices that's got us to this place, and it's a series of decisions that we can all make together that will hopefully move us forward. So thank you again for inviting me, and I'd be happy to take any questions that you have.
That was terrific, Michelle. Thank you. Questions?
Matt from Sarah, obviously fantastic presentation. This is all very kind of inspiring and a future that we look forward to. I'm wondering, as we see kind of an increase, I'll call it reliance on solar energy, and also a need for and leaning towards densification, I see a potential conflict. And so have you seen any cities or any exploration around solar rights, access to solar energy that would prevent larger developments getting FAR bonuses from blocking out other people's solar energy that they've invested in?
I wish we had such a problem that people were trying to put in so much solar and they were like, why can't I have more? But we haven't quite gotten to that yet. I think that is an excellent point. And I think that's why we're going to see some kind of verifiable offsets and power purchase agreements need to be able to be made. So right now, it's not actually legal to trade power across energy lines. But if you think about it, I brought up industrial properties specifically. Prologis is the second largest owner of rooftop solar in the world. They're producing a lot of solar. And if they could just sell that to another building that just didn't have the roof space or was in too much shadow, that could help do that. But right now, that's not allowed, but that's just a rule, and rules can change.
Charlie, are there any online questions?
So here's one from Sydney Regnier. Great talk. What recommendations does Michelle have for how to talk about the co-benefits of DERs and electrification? Are there quantifiable metrics on health benefits, for example?
There are definitely quantifiable metrics around electrification. I mentioned the UCLA study, but there have been a lot of things that talk about, we can talk about specifically the health benefits of indoor air quality related to electrification. There are studies related to the air quality pollution around those kind of peaker plants and other power plants that I spoke about. Again, they really impact frontline communities, which may be why we haven't heard more about some of these impacts in the past. So there is a lot about that. I mean, something I want to bring up is I don't think we can diminish the potential health and environmental impacts of the DERs themselves. So, I mean, batteries have a big impact. So we need to also, and I didn't mean to bring that up earlier, we need to be looking at the impacts of those and how we can increase battery recycling. But I think there's a lot of indoor air quality benefits that are been clearly associated with inside and outside when it comes to DERs.
Michelle, the solar adoption is really driven by this extreme drop-in cost. And with battery storage, could we expect to see a similar drop in cost?
Yes, I have been hearing about that. There is going to be a drop in cost. They're looking also for new technologies. But in particular, I mean, still this kind of lithium power 4-hour battery storage is really where we're going to see the most progress, but they are looking at different chemistries, and there's different kinds of utility scale storage, underground storage and salt caverns, all kinds of things happening. But yeah, it's really anticipated that that's going to come down quite a bit. I should say part of the uptick has really been because of the state and federal tax credits, and that project in Utah that I mentioned really benefited from those. Like it probably wouldn't have been able to happen without those. And we need those for pioneering projects, but it would be great to see some of those back in order to increase the uptake of things like batteries.
I'm going to interject with a question, if I may, because it relates to this, in particular, since I'm getting quotes right now on a solar system for my house, and I'm finding that the battery is as much of this as the solar panel. So from a district point of view, it totally makes sense that every house should have the battery so that they can plug into these virtual power plants. But from a single homeowner point of view, how do you motivate people to add a battery? Because you can make the resilience argument, but if it's only occasionally that you need to use that, I think it's a hard sell to ask single homeowners to pay literally twice as much to add a battery to the solar system.
It is a reason why we need incentives. It is another case for why we would be great to see developers or people who could wrap the capital that would cost to build batteries up into their financing and be able to maybe put that in their community benefits package for that they have in part of their development approval agreements. But also, I think this is where electric cars that bi-directional batteries are going to come into place, because it might make more sense to just make sure that your next car is, maybe you don't need a Ford F-150, but a Hyundai Iconic. Or I think the Nissan Leaf is also bidirectional, and that's where you store your power, and that taps into it after 5 when you get home.
Michelle, thank you. Gwellen Paliaga. I'm curious to hear more of your detailed thoughts around electrifying existing buildings. You talked about electrify everything in the cities, and particularly non-residential buildings. And I'm curious whether you think that regulation, mandatory versus incentives are the way to go, or whether there's a balance between those two.
Yeah, I was surprised. So I think David mentioned I sat on the mayor of San Francisco's kind of executive steering committee around their electrification process. And they did a really fantastic stakeholder engagement process with community groups. They did it with the, industry stakeholders, say the office owners and the multifamily owners, and they really did a good job. But I was pretty surprised to hear how long the existing office owners thought it was going to take for them to really get to all electric. And I guess I was surprised by the scale of the challenge, but if they were being honest, and I think a good process does bring in those voices, because you don't want them, you need to have realistic. But I do think we're at a place where we need to have mandates. It's nice to have a combination of both. I think that I believe the San Francisco ordinance is that office buildings don't need to go all electric till 2030. So that gives us a good amount of time and the price of batteries to come down. So one thing that they could do, and this relates to the previous question around solar space, is battery space, because we're looking at the cost of solar being so cheap during the day. I think you guys probably all, I know we had it, I think it's all the utilities in California did it this summer, where we switched to time of use charge. So it's really pretty affordable to use electricity during the day, but the prices really go up after 4 p.m. So it might make more sense. You have some panels, but you might have shade. It might not be enough. You have batteries that can soak up that what's going to be virtually free energy at some points, and can store that and use that to, power yourself during the rest of the day. But we are going to need some technology changes. What we hear from utilities, so there's 2 points I want to make. One is that utilities say that kind of their worst nightmare is that there's just one building left on the grid that's still using gas, right? And everybody else has gone all electric, but they've got to maintain these gas lines to get to these buildings. So there's going to be an incentive for a utility to help out in some way to help get some of these buildings over the line. There are bigger resilience issues, which maybe, a city or state would want to fund. What I heard from what the city of San Francisco says is that, let's say there's a major earthquake in the city, they would expect electricity to be out for a few days, a matter of up to 6 days, but the gas could be out for 6 months. So we have to do this. So I think that we can find money to do this if we really want to.
Hi, my name is Aditya from Stantec. My question is regarding the supply chain of the natural resource lithium. Electrification is great, but there are quite a number of articles that the lithium, which is considered as a white oil for electrification, the sourcing is very dirty. It destroys the communities where it is extracted from, like countries from Bolivia and other places. Are there any laws?
That's a really great point. Not only is there environmental damage, but I don't know if you saw recently, there was an article in the New Yorker about cobalt mining in the Congo, which was just, it's horrifying. And so, everything from, all these gadgets that we love, to our batteries have a real big impact. We don't see, I am not aware of laws in the US that are looking at supply chain. There is an emergence in other countries of looking at things, not only environmental impacts, but social impacts. For example, in Australia, lots of emerging laws around modern slavery, which is part of what we're seeing in some other countries related to not just batteries, but the whole building supply chain. We have to look at it. We've got to do a better job of recycling batteries. Like we just have to, and also creating secondary markets. So I believe it's the older Nissan Leafs that you can, people can taking some of those old batteries. It's not charging your car enough to be really a great model for a car anymore, but you can use it to charge their home. They are bidirectional. So can we do a better job of recycling? Can we create more like secondary markets? I mean, we have to, because you're right. It's not good.
Can you speak to using blockchain for this system? A concern I have about blockchain is the associated energy consumption. Non-fungible tokens and cryptocurrencies supposedly use a ton of energy.
Yeah, okay, so I'm not a blockchain expert. I'm definitely not a cryptocurrency expert, but there are different kinds of cryptocurrencies and just technologies that use different kinds of energy. So the particular one I referred to with the Victoria Bidder, they use a technology, a software called Power Ledger. And Power Ledger just switched over to a kind of, to using, I think it's called Solana, rather, because it's considered to be a lower cost energy. Cryptocurrencies are one thing and people mining it. And I have heard we've all heard those stories of like, they have the energy, they use as much energy as like the country of Austria, or these like kind of incredible stories. Blockchain itself is it's a series of contracts. And if it's a matter of it being supplied by the kind of energy, again, that's a conscious choice that people can use. But it's my understanding that there are different kinds that use less energy than others. I'm going to stop there before I get over my skis on like cryptocurrency.
Another online question. This is from Cindy again. The concept of demand flexibility has been gaining attention with the Department of Energy and utilities as an alternative to using DERs to manage the duck curve by dynamically managing building loads to provide grid services such as shedding or shifting loads. When the grid needs that support, has this concept been gaining any traction with developers and building owners? And if not, why not? It might be more cost effective than DERs.
Yeah, so I would say my experience is that people making the decisions about buildings are not getting into the weeds about things like load flexibility. That's just not their expertise. The same way that somebody is maybe an electrical engineer is not completely on top of like building finance. So I do think that there are a lot of really great consultants out there that are working on things like demand flexibility. And in fact, there is a virtual power plant called Ohm Connect, which you guys might be familiar with, that is about, you sign up for it. And if you're a PG&E, SDG&E, or SoCal Edison customer, you can sign up with them, and and you kind of agree that when the grid is under stress, that you will use less energy. Or better, if you have like a smart manager of your home electricity use, they will just manage it directly and really turn it down at key times. And they'll give you money, and they don't have a branded app, but they'll Venmo you the difference. So there is some kind of innovation around this yet. Load management is true. And energy efficiency, I don't want to undersell how important that is. But that is, neither of those things we need all of the things, actually.
Hi, Tushio from Atlanta 10. First of all, thanks so much for the inspirational presentation. Yeah, I really like the the all electric world you just described. So my first question is that, can you point to any specific study or research that's talking about the financial feasibility of such an all electric world, and like how long that could happen? So that's kind of my first question. I'll probably let you answer my first question first before I ask my second.
Sure. So I think there's a new organization called Rewiring America, and they are exactly advocating for this all electric world. And I believe they're starting with a kind of the single family home market. And one of their founders, Saul Griffith, who you may have heard of, I believe he lives here in the Bay Area, and he was a MacArthur fellow. He has a new book that just came out in the last week called Electrify. I haven't read it yet, but it's my understanding that a lot of that is specifically quantified in there.
Okay, thanks. So my second question is related to that case study you shared, the multifamily building virtual plan in Salt Lake City. So you mentioned that that's a collaboration between the utility and the real estate developer. So I guess they are paying for the installation of the battery and solar, I assume. And do you know if there's a payback for installing those systems? I mean, just a kind of a ballpark number would be great.
I do know that the hard cost of doing all of the solar, battery, and electric car charging was $32 million. So it was really something, and that they got state and federal tax credits. But I've read multiple articles about the project, but I haven't seen anything on what the payback would be. And again, I'm not sure if it would be replicable in another state because they wouldn't necessarily have the same kind of incentives. I'm trying to remember about the building in Fresno. What I did know about that project is that there was it was considered two separate financial structures. One is kind of owning the building, and a separate kind of business is doing the battery piece. I know that's how they're structuring it. I didn't read anything about payback periods for that.
Thanks.
Michelle, thank you again. That was a really inspirational and informative talk. Thank you. We're very lucky to have you.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.